Jess is saying she's excited to see what happens in 5 years or 10 years, but look what's happened in just 1 year. The difference from BeanCon'23 to BeanCon'24 and the diversity of speakers and where we are evolving as an industry is incredible. Only a year ago, we had Brad and Mike together. I think it was just a year ago on the same stage, and so it's great to hear of their partnership and relationship evolving and the movement to get Anderson's IQF frozen beans into stores. So I'm very excited to hear that, and we're moving very fast, so it may not take 5 years. Okay, so we're coming to the end, and I am very excited, and I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, who is going to present our special guest. We have a celebrity chef with us from Australia, and he is going to present her. And so I have the honor of introducing Paul Noonan, who you've already heard from on our stage. I don't think there's anybody that puts in more hours or crisscrosses the globe more than Paul in the name of beans. And I can't say enough about how the Beans is How campaign has really elevated the dialogue, really brought so many more people into our bean family, and is really helping us to expand our outreach and touch people and places and corners of the globe that it's all happening very fast. And so I'm really grateful. The U.S. Dry Bean Council has been working together with the Beans is How campaign, and we're really establishing a very beautiful complementary working relationship. We did help Beans is How fund some podcasts that I think they just launched them yesterday. Paul was mentioning, and so I hope that you'll all listen, because they do feature 3 representatives from the U.S. dry bean industry, and I think you'll recognize most of their names. So please find those podcasts. They are through the Chef's Manifesto. So working together with Paul and with Beans is How has just really been an amazing experience for bringing so many more incredible bean people into the fold, and for helping us expand our reach, and to give us all this exciting mantra of doubling global dry bean consumption by 2028. And of course, I do represent the U.S. dry bean industry, but we believe very strongly that a larger pie means that everybody gets a larger piece. So with that, I'd like to ask Paul Noonan to make his grand entrance with our celebrity guest. Here he is. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Rebecca, and the love is mutual, and so I appreciate you and appreciate it. If you are interested in downloading the podcast that we were mentioning, we're going to pass around some QR codes. If you scan it, or you can just go to Apple, it's the Chef's Manifesto podcast. It's going to have 10 seasons, all about beans. You'll recognize that Chelsea is in the first episode that came out yesterday. So check it out, tell your friends about it. But we're going to get started, and we're going to ask everyone to stand up, because I'm going to invite Alice out. But Alice has a whole media personality, and as part of that, she said, "Can we do a selfie with everyone?" And she said, "We'll do it at the end." And I said, "No, we're going to do it right at the beginning." So as Alice comes out, I want you to all stand up, and we're going to all kind of crowd into the center a little bit. So I'm serious. Everyone stand up. We're going to crowd into the center, and then we're going to do a quick selfie. And then you can go and sit back down. But this is going to be a bit of exercise. So just move into this kind of zone. And let's, as we're doing it, let's clap our hands, and we'll welcome Alice Zaslavsky.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Getting up is good, especially after such a long day.
So we're going to do this.
We've come a long way. Let's get this selfie going. So Thank you for cooperating.
If you can't see the phone, you can't. Well,
we can't see you.
We can't see you. So
getting close.
Gathering closer.
This is going to be so great.
Find a friend.
Yes. And find us on LinkedIn for this photo.
They all like beans, and gas is okay. We had that conversation, I think.
Okay, this is it.
Where is it? Where are we? Are we here?
I think we're good. Shuffle in, everyone.
We'll just take lots.
Yes. Beans. Great.
Perfect. Okay, now you can sit down.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you all for humouring us.
Okay. While everyone is sitting down, it is so great to be here, and today has been an amazing day. So many insights, so many conversations, so many new connections. And I'm super excited about being able to sit alongside a fellow Aussie. We probably came from it was quite a long trip.
It's actually 9:30 a.m. on Saturday, so we come to you from the future.
Yes.
With some insights.
And we're here enjoying ourselves at BeanCon'24 in Mexico. And I would love to, we were talking yesterday, and I often like people to introduce themselves and then I'll fill in all the things you miss out that I think are interesting. But Alice, tell us, who are you?
Well, I think the title of this closing keynote is perfect for me because I like to think of myself as someone who is inspired by action. And I like to think of myself as a bit of an actioner as well. You know, there are those people who talk about doing things, and then there are those people who do the things. I've seen problems and I find solutions for them. My background is actually teaching. I was a teacher of humanities at a top tier school in Melbourne, but I always loved food. And so what I did was I would bring food into my lessons in my humanities classes, and I would take my students on school camps. And these were year 8s, so they're 12, 13, 14 years old. And part of the kind of mission statement of those camps was helping them to learn to cook for themselves. And they couldn't dice an onion, let alone cook themselves a chili con carne. So that's really when I identified that there was a big problem to solve, because just like other nations in the world, Australia has slowly but surely deprioritised food literacy across the curriculum. And there's a good reason for it, because numeracy and literacy and all other competing stakeholders have come into the sphere. Teachers are overworked and underpaid. Parents are putting so much onus on the schools to bring this education forward, while the schools are battling their own battles, you know, let alone what's happened in the past few years with COVID. So what I suggested way back in 2012 was an integrated food and culture elective for my year 8s. And I was the head of department, so I thought, easy, I'll just slip it in, see what happens. And my heads of school said, it's a great idea, but you don't have the expertise and we don't think you'll get the numbers. And if there's anything I know about myself, Paul Newnham, it's tell me I can't do something and I will do it doubly so. So I went off every weekend for a whole year and did a chef-at-home apprenticeship at a trade college.
Wow.
And at the end of that year, they were bumping out our course and bumping in auditions for a little show that you may have heard of anywhere in the world called MasterChef Australia. It is the biggest cooking show franchise in the world. And I thought, okay, I've got the expertise now.
1 year.
And if my kids, 1 year pro, it was with a Michelin star chef, you know, it was legit.
Yeah.
If my kids see me on TV, even for an episode, I'll get the numbers. So it was as organic as that. And that was now 12 years ago, and I haven't looked back since.
So how did you go on MasterChef?
I went all right. You know, I went better than one episode. I left just before finals week. The guy that won my season is now one of the judges on the program, so I'd like to think it was the best season ever. But I never expected to win the show. I feel like I've won at life, because the platform that I was afforded through that program, and also since then, with all of the skills that I've acquired, has meant that I can meet people in this room, meet people where they are, and find solutions for big questions.
Yeah.
Like, how do we make musical fruit super cool?
And so, I mean, I've been privileged to watch a couple of those episodes. And if you do want to go and dig them out of the YouTube, check them out. But tell us a little bit about what did you learn through that process of being on that show? And you know, you're doing TV there, you're competing, you're thinking about food. What happened in that too? Like, what's the insight you got from there?
Look, that feels like a lifetime ago. So since the show, I've hosted my own TV shows. I'm a broadcaster in Australia. I'm the culinary correspondent for our public broadcaster, the ABC, as well as radio as well. And obviously my cookbooks, my columns. But on the show, the big kind of aha moment that I had is that if you cook for other people with the expectation of pleasing other people, then you're never going to cook with a freedom, you know, because you're cooking with that expectation and fear. And when you cook with fear, the food just doesn't taste right. So I'd like to think that in what I'm doing now, I'm kind of resolving some of those fear-based instincts that some people have with cooking.
So tell us a little bit more. You kind of just quickly went through. You've got a couple of books. You're doing some TV, some broadcasting. Talk to us a little bit about, maybe let's start with the books.
Yeah, you might have caught me on final edits of my 4th cookbook. My best known book, which you will see in markets right across the world. It's in 6 different languages, 14 different countries. It's called In Praise of Veg. It was a finalist in the James Beard. It was, one of the best cookbooks of the year in the Netherlands. I'm trying to see. Mexico, it hasn't gotten to Mexico yet. So, if you know some people in publishing, maybe Spanish is the next book to come out. But In Praise of Veg for me was a real labour of love. And that actually came through, that food and culture elective. I got to make that too. It's called Phenomenom with an M. You can check it out at phenomenom.com.au, and it's funded by growers. So for those of you in the audience who are growers, I thank you, because you can do this too. We've had upwards of $2.5 million worth of funding. It's in thousands of schools, being used by thousands of teachers. And what it's doing is it's making vegetables cool for kids as an intercurricular, intracurricular program, cross-curricular. So, kitchen gardens are fantastic. Food education, food literacy is terrific. But as schools bump out kitchens and bump in science labs, how do we find those gaps to continue to make food a conversation and help kids feel that understanding food, the way that it connects with culture, with the environment, with community, is the best way for them to feel all of that meaning, all of those things that Eve spoke about right at the start of the day. So you can check it out. It's all free, thanks to growers, and we're continuing with these resources. But what happened was we did heaps of qual and quant off the back of these projects because it's R&D funds. And what we found is 75% of children are willing to try new vegetables once they start to access these resources. And then they go home and their parents don't know what to do with those vegetables, which is exactly why I wrote In Praise of Veg. And I think that book and that program is really beneficial in being able to translate some of those learnings into a bean-based conversation.
One of the things that, if you follow Alice on Instagram or you see some of it, you bring style, you bring colour, and you bring energy, I guess, to food.
I'm like the Fran Drescher of food, style and flair.
And tell us a little bit about why do you do that? I kind of, where does that come from? And is that just who you are, or where and how?
I don't think it's an affectation. I just think that if you think about food, you eat with your eyes first. And so if you have a sense of energy and vitality and enthusiasm, that comes through, and it's something that people can aspire to. That sense of FOMO that was spoken about as well, that Joanna spoke about, cultivating that sense of what am I missing out on? People ask me all the time, how do you bounce out of bed? I'm up at 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning to host Saturday breakfast on ABC Radio Melbourne, and people say to me, how do you have energy to do that? And I just say, veg, and then they go, what do you mean veg? And then we can continue that conversation. Even something as simple as, because people are very aspirational, and particularly when it comes to the digital space, they're thinking, how can I have what this person has? It doesn't have to be explicit. It can just be implied. And even starting the conversation of sharing with my community that I'm here, and people saying, oh, beans, I've been thinking about beans. This might be my sign to try the bean protocol. And we kind of continue that conversation. And I think if I was applying a health focus, or if I was didactic in the way that I spoke about food, it wouldn't land the way that something as subliminal as stealth health, which is absolutely what I'm talking about.
Talk a bit more about stealth.
Well, I'm just stealing from Nick, really. Stealth health is that notion that health by stealth is very important in this day and age, because what used to happen is that you would be shown a food pyramid and you would be told this is the way that you should be eating and these are the macro and micronutrients that you need to eat every day. But here's what we've learned. When you apply a health focus to the way that you communicate about a food, the expectation of flavour goes down. So if I say to you, here is this protein, fiber, resistant starch, loaded bean smoothie, right? It kind of makes you want to gag right away. I don't know how it sounds in Spanish, but right? But if I said to you, hey, here is this delicious cinnamon sprinkled pinch of Himalayan salt flake, rich velvety smoothie that's going to be a simple way for you to nourish yourself and have that sense of satiety, the satisfaction at the start of your day, boom, right away, the ghrelins start to grumble, right? And then you start to think, okay, my expectations are heightened and I'm ready for this to be delicious. You got to fake it till you make it, you know?
Yeah. No, and I mean, that whole way that you bring the dish in and you engage with it and the way that you're talking about, the language is different.
Yes.
And so did you, in the phenomenon and the school work that you did around veg, how did that kind of inform some of this with you? We
did so much research into the ways and the attitudes and the language that's used around vegetables. So, you know, from parents, we had focus groups of parents, of teachers, we had one-to-one interviews with kids as well. And what really came through is that a lot of the time we approach vegetables, ergo beans, with a real defeatist attitude. It's like our expectations are that for children in particular, they're not going to want to eat it. And it's as simple as changing the way that we approach it. It's like if I was still teaching and I came into the classroom and said to my students, okay, the plague. You're not going to love this, but we've got to learn it because it's going to be on the exam. That is joyless.
Yeah.
And it's not going to engage the students. So why is it when we land green stuff on the table, when we put down like that lunch dish, that combination of the garbanzo and the tomato and the onion and the kidney bean, you know, that is delish, right? I didn't need anybody to tell me that was blah, 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 all of those things. All I needed to do was taste it. So sometimes it's actually about saying less. You don't need to use fun language with your kids. Say nothing when you put the food on the table. Just eat it with them. And ham it up. Like, you got to fake it till you make it. So I've got a 4.5-year-old, and sometimes I'll put down the food and I'll be eating it with her, and I'll be like, and she'll be like, suspicious. So the less that I do, and the best example is sometimes when we go to a restaurant and there's something new on the table. She's now at kindergarten, so she's hearing how other kids talk about food, and she's hearing, oh, I don't like it. So she'll try it on. She'll say, I don't like that. I'm not going to taste it. And we go, great, more for us. And then she's like, FOMO, what am I missing out on? So what I'm telling you is less is more when it comes to talking about food. But like when you use the language, don't expect to be defeated. Expect to be a winner. Think like a winner.
So you've done over your career, and a number of your books have been really around thinking about vegetables and thinking about vegetables in a broad sense.
Yep.
As we're here at BeanCon, beans. What are the ways, like, so you've shared a little bit, but what are some of the other ideas and thoughts you have to make beans a star of a plate?
Yeah.
What's been running through your brain today?
So I can't tell you. I probably won't get through it all, so I'm glad that I'm still here tomorrow because I'll just jump on the stage. This is the thing that I remembered. So I think that one industry that is quite applicable is mushrooms. You know, the third kingdom. I think that beans and mushrooms suffer from similar afflictions sometimes when it comes to the consumer, in that, you know, texturally, mushrooms are challenging because they're slimy. Beans, sometimes slimy, sometimes that might be that they're chalky. You know, how do we overcome that? We teach them to cook them differently. That question that I asked about beans making you toot, that's an important question for consumers because we might know this stuff, but the consumer thinks, oh, but you know, how can I circumvent the gas? So as a cook, I'm thinking about ways to do that. What can I apply from a food chemistry perspective to make those changes? one thing that you can do, and you can message this on the back of your cans, on the back of your labels, is if you're going to cook these beans, use kombu. You know, kombu in Japan is used to mitigate some of that gas factor. The inulin in beans, that prebiotic, is a similar one to what you'll find in Jerusalem artichoke. And in Praise of Veg, I talk about tomato being a really great mitigator of that inulin. It kind of balances it out. It's why often bean dishes are cooked with tomato. But if you're an experienced cook, you would know that any acidic food, if cooked too early with beans, will toughen their exterior. So it's about teaching the consumer to cook beans well. Soak them in salted water so that they're well seasoned throughout. You can write this down, sure. I'll send you some notes. Soak them so that they're well seasoned throughout. If you don't have time to soak them, it's not the end of the day. If you've got a pressure cooker, Bob's your uncle. Is that an expression that you use here? Can you translate that? It works. Uncle Bob knows these things. Then when you're cooking the beans, you know, the sofrito, like when you're sweating the onions, do all of that stuff before you add the beans. Cook them low and slow till they're tender, and then add your tomatoes. And remember that tomatoes can benefit from a little bit of sugar. I know that your bliss point, you know, Alison tells me your bliss point is a little bit higher than us Aussies. So taste as you go. A pinch of sugar is like a nonna's trick to make tomatoes taste like they're at their peak. And it's that balance then of the sweet, the salty, the texture of those beans that are now velvety instead of chalky. All of that stuff is about experience and flying hours in the kitchen. And what you want is you want your consumer, you want the cook to feel like they've won the first time round. So how can we empower consumers, household cooks, to feel like they can be winners? First go.
One big question, and this is a bit of a test. When do you add the salt?
So here's the thing, right? So I always thought that you don't add the salt because it retards the outside of the bean. But actually, you add the salt in the soaking water. So when you're soaking the beans, that bean water, you can salt. Then you don't need to drain and rinse. You cook it in the soaking water, just add extra water.
So the salt's got to be in during
the soaking, because it's reverse osmosis, and that's how you get that really delicious sort of the balance that brings out the sweetness in the beans. The other thing that salt does from a sort of biochemistry kind of taste science perspective is that it makes things taste creamier. And that is one aspect of beans that I think we should really be leaning into, the creaminess of beans. It's what makes hummus so delicious. It's what I love about a butter bean, you know. So that is something that we should be celebrating.
So, favourite bean recipe?
I knew you were going to ask me this, Paul, so I've pre-sent you. I mean, I can't pick. So I know my accent sounds like I'm Aussie through and through, but I actually was born in Georgia, in the former Soviet Union, not the Georgia that's around the corner. And so beans are a big part of our cuisine. So something like, we've got a delicious bean soup that I just love. But the bean dish that I really wanted to talk to you about is one that I cooked with one of probably the most famous plant-forward chefs in the world, Yotam Ottolenghi. One of the privileges of what I get to do in Australia is when we get a big international name come out, I tend to be the one that gets on the mic and does what Paul's doing. And so Yotam and I toured Australia and New Zealand. And every matinee and every evening, we would set a challenge he would set the challenge of cooking a dish with a can of butter beans. So the first element was butter beans, the next was some sort of creamy sauce that went on top, and then some toppings. So whether you use chamula or you use some harissa, you use some spring onions, some dukkha, you know, these kinds of flavours. And the reason why this dish is my favourite, look at it. The reason why this dish is my favourite is not necessarily because it's the most delicious bean dish that I've eaten. It's because every state that we visited sold out of butter beans in the two majors after the show. Because the first thing that consumers did, or that the audience did once they left, was they went and they tried the dish for themselves because it seemed so easy. because we didn't even cook the beans. You just whack them down. So I think the simpler we can make things, we don't have to overcomplicate and teach them how to refry and teach them how to do these things. Take a tin, take 5 small tins of beans to work, have them in your desk, and whatever salad you're eating, whatever bowl you're putting together, add that hit of bean. Hit them with the beans.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. And I think sometimes, like you've touched on so many different techniques there, I suppose, or insights. What role do you think, you also are obviously involved in media, what role does media play in helping to get across this message, and what could we be thinking about more around the bean?
As a broadcaster, as somebody in the media, it excites me when I learn something new because it's a new piece of content that I can share. So I think that the role that media can play is in translating and communicating in a really clear and concise way some of these big reports and insights. So the best thing that you can do is arm us with those insights, invite us to these events, and make the conversation one that is more of a dialogue rather than a monologue. Don't be the kind of researcher or organisation that only reaches out when you want something. Maintain that communication. Connect with us on social platforms, whether you're a LinkedIn larrikin or a Twitter.
Well, it's not even Twitter.
Oh, you're an expat. I'm trying to work it out. But what I mean is that one of the things that we need to remember is that we are competing for share of voice in these conversations with every other food group and every other, consumer good. So how can we help to amplify each other's insights? How can we help to amplify the messages that we want to get across? Because ultimately our missions are actually the same. If there's anything that I've gleaned from today, it's that everybody's on the same page. It's perhaps we've got different levers or different priorities, but we're all saying the same things. So how can we help each other to amplify our voices so that we can be the rising tide that raises all of the ships?
Absolutely. I'm going to come to any questions. So if you've got a question, have a little bit of a think about it, get ready with the microphones, and we'll come to you in 1 minute. In terms of where people can find recipes, like what would your advice be? Obviously you've got cookbooks, but I sometimes get paralysed by looking at, I go online and everyone's got a set of recipes. How do you encourage people to kind of navigate that world?
I think it depends on what kind of person you are. Like Amelia's got that fantastic Bold Bean Co. cookbook as well. So it kind of depends on what kind of cook you are and what you're trying to achieve. Again, if you have a brand that is in market and it's B2C and you have a social media following, user-generated content is really useful. So UGC, particularly accessing the hashtag #BeansIsHow and finding some really inspiring things that creators are already doing so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and then just sharing it across to your channels is a really easy way to supply tried and true and good-looking content that's free.
Yeah. And then one other question is the link between restaurants. So there's often a conversation about what people see online, what they from content creators, but then how do restaurants play that role, and how do you experience restaurant food versus home cooking?
Yeah, restaurant food is sometimes food, and the way that I experience it is I'm inspired by it, but I'm not going to go home and translate it in exactly the same way. So what I would say though is that chefs will always play a really strong role in being the key opinion leaders and the sort of the influencers within the space. So how are you engaging with your local influencers, your local chefs? I had a fantastic conversation with Martin from California over lunch. He's somewhere over there, who's a grower and who showed me these amazing videos of how he harvests his beans and talked me through the process. I have never been to a farm that grows beans. I've picked broad beans, I've done all those sorts of things, but I've never seen it in that commercial quantity. So do have programs that engage with your local chefs and bring them on farm, because then they can tell that story as well. And there are just so many ways in which you can access points in which you could be engaging, not just with chefs, but also with culinary nutritionists, with teachers. You know, I mentioned Phenomenon. There is no reason why the bean growers, the US dry beans, couldn't think about integrating some sort of program, because it sounds like those 45 million eaters every day. Sure, yes, they're being served up beans and that's what they're eating, but wouldn't it be amazing if you could then integrate some education about the cultural heritage of beans, or the significance historically, or the scientific principles of why it is that beans need salt at this point, or whatever. It doesn't have to be isolated in home economics or food science. It can be a part of an integrated conversation, because that means that every teacher can utilise it. And if there's one thing we know, it's that if you build it, they will come. If you give them these quality resources that are aligned to your curriculum, they will use them.
And as you were talking, and one of the things that I think is really critical in events like this is about building bridges, because there's a lot of people trying to move in the same direction, but often they're, and I think Robert mentioned about, you know, we're all in this together. It's not about competition as such. It's about us all moving together, and I think it's about building those bridges between the farmer to the restaurant, from the restaurant to the home, from the home to the retail, from the school to the, and working that out in a way that actually starts to get interest in food. And I think the more we're talking about food, the more we're engaging with food, the more we're asking the right questions, the more we're kind of tying that. What about cultural heritage? And, you know, like, we both live in a city that's very multicultural, and there's a lot of different traditions that have beans in them. Just a reflection on that.
So thinking about what Eve spoke about in the morning, you know, that food justice and food equality was one way in which she was able to circumvent that notion of beans being perceived as a poverty mindset food. I think that cultural heritage piece, particularly at a time when we are learning to celebrate multiculturalism and understanding how cultures have changed, have evolved, have come together, is a really beautiful conversation, and beans is a really great and easy way to do that. So that's really exciting as well. And I should say too, you know, that idea of working together, like, it's called a food chain for a reason. And I think one of the other things about those 45 million children that you're accessing is that you also want to hook some of those kids into maybe even becoming a grower themselves. I don't know, I'm assuming it's similar here, but in Australia, kids are not choosing to be farmers anymore because they perceive farming to be dirty hands and rough work and tough, and oh, why would I want to do that? We need to show them how exciting agriculture can be, so that we can shore up the sustainability of the industry, not just from the perspective of the environment, but also from the perspective of the new force coming through.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to open it up for any questions, cooking tips, other ideas. We are on the... We're between you guys
fine.
and probably some wine or something.
We get it. You can come and find me
or
and
some
ask
bean
me
dishes.
questions.
But any questions for Alice?
It's just because we've been so comprehensive.
I know.
Oh yeah, one more. Okay, I've remembered now.
I've got questions to keep asking.
Oh,
you,
sure.
But
the other thing I think as well about these kind of global conversations, looks like Alison's got a question, is that because of the internet and because of the advent of so many different ways to connect, we no longer have to duplicate. So I'm in conversation with educators in the UK, in the US, talking about how we can actually kind of utilise each other's resources rather than just like making the same thing with a different label on the front.
I love this session. It's amazing. I've got a question for you about your school's programme, which I think is so special, and I'd love to see that replicated. My question is about farmers and growers and the true cost of food, and, you know, they're being squeezed somewhat. So Is that a challenge that you're finding to be a bit of a barrier, or how do you kind of elicit those funds from the growers? Because I'm sure that everybody wants to contribute to kind of child education, but the reality of, you know, the cost of that might be quite challenging.
It's a policy decision. So growers have to subsidise with this levy, and they can choose. So the Vegetable Fund has $20 million a year to spend on R&D, and they can choose how they spend it. And those growers crack the whip. You know, they want to make sure that their investment is utilised and it's matched dollar for dollar with the Australian government. So that's the other thing that I would say is, you know, the policy's been implemented by the government, so put your money where your mouth is, you know. So these are things that absolutely can, you know, very happy to connect you with the right people at Hort Innovation in Australia and see if it is something that's feasible for you as well. Why not join forces rather than sort of funding little pockets here and there?
Yeah.
Add that to the policy toolkit, hey? All countries need to do that.
Any other burning questions? One down the front. Rebecca.
It looks like, I mean, we've got 8 minutes. This is good.
Yeah, we're good.
We're like, whoosh.
I've got some more questions.
Okay, thank you so much. This is a very easy question, and I'm just curious. I noticed that when you talk about beans, you refer to them as a vegetable. So in Australia, are beans strictly seen as a vegetable, or are they also a carbohydrate, or are they defined any other way, or do beans fit solely into the veg category?
I don't think that we've ever kind of made those distinctions, you know, in Australia. And actually, I'm so glad you've reminded me of this, Rebecca. I think one of the most successful food policies that's come out in the last few years, or sort of communications of dietary guidelines, is Canada, who are really clear. They've like gotten rid of the pyramid altogether and just sort of said, eat fruit, vegetables, protein, but mostly from plant sources, and drink mostly water. You know, that's kind of the simplicity of it, and that's kind of the truth. So what I would say, and particularly from today, the reminder that beans as a whole food, yes, that I think they're a vegetable, but also they're full of fibre, they're full of protein, they've got the iron as well. Like, what an amazing, amazing food. What an incredible thing you do for people, for the planet, growing these plants. And I think that fibre conversation came up as well. You know, I hosted the roundtable presentation in Australia of like the big plan forward for policy on the Obesity Coalition. And someone stood up, you know, because we were talking about protein deficiency, and someone stood up and said, why is no one talking about fibre? So if there's another takeaway that you can take from today, it's that fibre will be the next conversation. Like, it's in the zeitgeist, so be at the crest of the wave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think that is really, I think the fibre conversation, and it's thinking about how you think about the labels. And I think what you're asking there, Rebecca, is a good question, because different parts of the world, I think beans have got stuck in certain categories. Some of them are technical, and some of them are just this, it's just stuck. And it's about opening up people's imagination a little bit about how you can imagine them to get more on the plate.
Yeah.
So, Alice, just in terms of getting more beans on the menu, what would be one or two just of your top tips for integrating, and what are you thinking about in terms of recipe development from that perspective?
So the thing that I'm taking away as well is that notion of beans being the Cinderella of alt proteins. I love that idea. So going to chefs and going to cookbook authors and saying, you know, because Javier, you know, gold, going to people who are developing recipes and saying that if you want a dish to be satisfying and if you want it to be a complete meal, then how, you know, what's the simplest thing you can do is crack a tin of beans. Super simple, you know, gold.
Yeah.
Gold, yeah.
I have a question. So you've kind of touched on this, but in your work with media, have you seen a particular, you know, an elevator speech can be effective, right? So have you seen particular sound bites that really speak to people quickly and getting the message out about beans? And Paul, I think you can probably speak to this in other contexts too.
I'm still digesting today, and I'll come to you with some sound bites, but I've got a really good example for you from mushrooms. People love biohacks. It was one of the, that kind of fortifying foods. And mushrooms, did you know that if you put your mushrooms outside for 15 minutes, they can absorb vitamin D, like as though they're human. And then if you eat those tanned mushrooms, then that vitamin D is bioavailable to humans. I learnt that through a research study that was done by Mushrooms Australia, funded by them with my friend Flavia Fayette Moore.
Yeah.
You tan the mushrooms.
You tan the mushrooms.
For 15 minutes, you put them in the fridge. It can last for 3 to 4 days with that vitamin D inside, and then you can cook it, and it doesn't cook it out. It's wild. I see eyebrows raised. That's exciting. So what you need to do as bean people is find something like that that makes people feel like they're curious, they're interested, they're being let in on a secret.
That feels like a TikTok.
That is 1000% a TikTok trend, and whether it's
your mushrooms.
setting a bean challenge for yourself, like eat beans, see how long it takes for you to stop feeling, that pants party, whatever it takes. Like, you just got to find a fun way to connect with people rather than sort of like slapping them over the head with white papers, because they don't give a shiitake.
Absolutely. And I mean, to me, there's a lot of the statements at places like this which are about getting those interesting tidbits, And I do this all the time, where you just start talking about a food, and I talk about beans all the time, obviously, but you just start sharing a couple of stats about it being a prebiotic or about fibre or something, and people come from the other side of the room often, and they go, can you just tell us what you're talking about? They want you to tell them what to eat. Like, people are desperate for somebody to tell them what to do. They are so confused by the food system at the moment. They hear all these messages and they're like, can somebody just tell us what we should be eating? And make it look amazing.
I think what Nick, one of the big kind of like mind-blowing moments was Nick standing up there with the slide about all of the oldest living cultures having beans as part of their cuisine. The longest living people in the world are all eating beans. Like, that is a mind blower. I think that's enough. That's the thing that I tweeted out.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that part, like, often we talk about, foods of the future, and we talk about all these development, but it's also about going backwards to go forwards. So it's about looking back at culture, looking back at history, and seeing what are these foods that these cultures have used for many generations.
That's it.
But also taking that forward in a new way, in innovating on the dishes and on the plate, and kind of. So to me, that's super exciting.
Tell the heritage story. Check out Martin's 74-year-old tractor that he's still using for harvesting. That's the sort of story that consumers will love, because they want to go back to the simplicity and they want to go back to traceability and trust. That's the story. And
this is like a classic example. You guys sat next to each other at lunch, and the points, you've memorised all these points. Now, either there's something special about you, which there is, but it's also the power of those stories. It's about getting into the detail. And I think we've got to take beans and we've got to start to talk about all the different varieties and where they're grown and how are they grown and how do you cook them and where did it come from. And we've got to bring all that to the table. Because I think that is what really brings us together, and so really key. So we're coming to the end. I encourage you to check out Alice online. Just Google Alice and find her.
It's Alice in Frames in Spanish. Frames. It's Frames.
Tell us about that. Where did it come from?
No, well, Alice in Frames, like the glasses. I like puns. Alice in Chains is a band, but if Spanish is your Alice in Frames, no, my bad. No, okay, cool. I had somebody say to me, I had somebody say to me, "What's Alice in Frames?" And that's when I thought it was a thing. But no, find me on whatever platform you have. I'm really happy. I often have small producers contact me and sort of say, "Hey, I'm thinking this. What do you think?" I love helping people find solutions, and I'm really inspired to see when people are doing things differently, because it's all about finding your little sphere of influence, and each ripple is going to lead to a tidal wave of change.
And I'm sure there's going to be more bean recipes on on your feed?
Well, I mean, I'm literally writing a book about vegetables again, salads, bowl food. There are so many beans in this book.
lot.
It comes out in October. Check it out.
Well, thank you, Alice, and thank you again to Rebecca and the whole team at US Dry Beans for having us here today. Thank you.
Thank you,
round
Paul.
Round of applause for Alice.
And Paul Noonan. See you at dinner.
Thank you for a great panel, Alice, and we are about to finish this program, and I want to do some housekeeping really quickly, please. I want to remind that if you have some of your service still on your table, if you can fill them out and just leave them there, please. Also, we are going to have our great bean extravaganza at 7 o'clock here at the foyer of the Tulum room. Also, don't forget to leave your receivers, exchange them for your IDs. But before that, I want to present really quickly our chef that has been coordinating all of the recipes with the hotel chef for the bean extravaganza. He is a master chef finalist here from Mexico, and he's been our ambassador during the Pulses for Health Alliance promotion that we've been doing, for the last couple of years. So if you can run the video, please. This is Carlos Leal. So 7 o'clock, and also don't forget that tomorrow we have our business meetings that start at 8 o'clock here at this room. Make sure that you come early, so you can follow the appointments that you already have. And also we have a number of workshops after the business meetings, so you're welcome to participate on them, and we will see you here then. All right, thank you.